Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher, and I'm here today with my colleague, formerly of the Tufts Admission Office, graduate of Carleton College, resident of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yeah. Is that a good lead in? We got Becky Leichling here on the show today. Becky, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just want to let all of our listeners know that we've got a great show lined up. We're going to spend some time talking about early action and early decision, both from an admission standpoint and from a college finance standpoint. So you'll want to stick around for the next two segments of the show. We're going to start today, though, in talking about the University of California system. And particularly, we want to focus on the essays. Now, Becky and I have been at College Coach for me 7 years. You 8 years. You're always N+1 wherever I am. And we both started in our Palo Alto office. So we have a lot of familiarity with the University of California system. The essays, I think, have been the same for as long as we've been here with College Coach. Do you remember any changes?
No, the UCs used to have 2 long essays, and then they flipped to the short essays, maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
I'm glad we keep you around. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's great. And things are always changing with the UCs. We just got word. Yeah. I can't break news on a podcast that's going to air a week from today, but the University of California system is in a situation now where a judge has ordered that they cannot consider SAT or ACT scores. I think the UCs are still in a position where they're trying to determine whether to challenge that, but it sounds like at least UC Berkeley is going to move forward without considering those scores for this fall of 2020 admission for fall 2021. Becky, what's your sense of how that's going to change the importance of the essays? Do they become more important? Is this something that students should think about as having a bigger role in the process now?
My gut response is no, because I think in the previous process, students over-rely or overestimate the value of testing. And so I think the absence of testing probably normalizes the weight of essays and activities and grades for students in a way that already is for admissions officers.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great observation. I feel like historically with the UCs, I felt like they've been much more driven by grades and courses in terms of just the outcomes that I've seen for students than testing. So I've seen a lot of students with really strong testing, but mediocre grades that have not found success that they thought they were going to get at certain UCs. And so I think you might be right that this is probably a smaller piece of the puzzle than we've ever thought. And now that it's gone, it's still not going to change the overall landscape all that much.
The UCs have always been so transparent with their 14 factors for comprehensive review.
That's right.
And they still are practicing that. And so I hope more than ever students believe it and put time and effort and care into their essays because they should have always been doing so.
Yeah, Becky Leichling, you better believe it, right? That's your tagline. Okay, so let's talk about the actual essays. And we've talked about the UC essays before. So if you want to go and listen to sort of a piece-by-piece breakdown of each of the 8 personal insight questions, you can look back into our archives. I want to do some sort of quick hits here with Becky for today. The first thing I want to just start with, do you have a favorite among the 8 personal insight questions, one that you like the best?
I don't, because I truly, genuinely, fully love all of these. I love the UC essays. I think they are hands down the best approach to essays. I have all my students start here. Whether or not they're applying to the UCs, I think this is great fodder for brainstorming because they ask so many different questions in so many different ways that every young person, in theory, can say, oh, yes, this one makes sense for me. I hear a good answer for myself here. So I don't actually have a favorite question, but I think that you do, Ian. What is your favorite question?
No, I mean, I didn't ask that question just so I could say what my favorite is. I think I like the creative side essay the most among the group, just because I think that there is some real potential there. A lot of students sort of box themselves into thinking, am I artistic? Am I musical? Do I make things that are beautiful? And I have seen students use this prompt to describe the ways that they engage with things like computer science or the methods that they use to interact with their peers in a way that I think can be really exciting. So I just like that the way that this particular essay is this question is phrased, how do you express your creative side, has this potential to open up a lot of different possibilities with students. And it's that flexibility, I think, in assessing what a prompt can be that is really great for students.
I actually, when I think of how I would have answered these prompts as a 17-year-old, I would have not at all responded to that one, because I would have never thought of myself as creative. That's not one of the, ways I would put myself in a box, even though on paper I have done creative things, and I believe that I'm a creative problem solver, but it just, the word creative doesn't resonate with me given how I see myself. So I agree with everything you said about the flexibility of that prompt, and I see that across all of these. And I think I do encourage my students not to zone in too much on a literal definition of one of the supporting subtext questions. Because you can't answer that specific question doesn't mean you should avoid the entire prompt from a different angle. And actually, I think we actually might even have a difference of opinion about one of these questions.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I was like reading them through and I was like, oh, I like this one. I recall a conversation among some of our coworkers a few weeks back about prompt number 5, which is describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you've taken to overcome this challenge. How has this challenge affected your academic achievement? I feel personally totally willing to ignore the second sentence of that question.
The academic achievement piece.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When I listen to this question and I think about significant challenge you have faced, steps, overcoming, I feel like this speaks to resilience and bravery and empathy and self-confidence and a whole host of really foundational, powerful, inherent traits that are valuable. And if a student has a story to tell and feels like these experiences resonate with them, I wouldn't discourage them from responding to that prompt simply because it didn't affect their grades.
Interesting. Yeah, I tend to look at that academic piece. And I think that it's not always that you see a difference in grades. It's not always that it's reflected in a test that was failed or a challenge for a particular subject. It might just be I had to shift around certain priorities that I had because of a challenge that I was experiencing. And I actually was brainstorming with a student just yesterday, and he was talking about a moment where his grandmother had died and his entire family, except for him, had to leave the country to go to the funeral. And so he was in a position where it was finals week and he had to study for his finals while being aware that his grandmother had just passed. And he was also in a position where I got nobody here to cook me meals and make sure I get to school and all those pieces. And so I think the academic piece for me can be an anchor that allows students to sort of think about, okay, what's the effect of this on my overall engagement with my school, my family, et cetera? Whereas if a student doesn't necessarily consider that academic piece, sometimes I think they can float away and think about challenges that might not necessarily have as much of a bearing on the application process. I suppose it's sort of a know it when you see it kind of thing. I think what the big problem with this prompt is that it sort of feeds an assumption that we see from a lot of students that they have to write about an obstacle. And so you'll see us a lot of students that say, okay, well, I got to respond to number 5 because they want to read that. What's your take on just questions here that need to be answered versus questions here that are just one among many on a menu of options?
I know exactly what you're talking about. And when I have students who are gravitating towards prompt 5 because they think they're supposed to, I like to pause and say, hey, if you have gotten to this point in your life without having to navigate significant trauma, that is a gift. I think that's wonderful. Let's acknowledge that and have gratitude and figure out what else is also really valuable about your lived experience so far.
That's right.
And this is not a competition for who has it worse. And if that's the way you're thinking about it, I think that's not a battle you want to win and isn't one you should try to fight, right?
Yeah.
So I totally agree. It's like there's this, we like gossiping. We like hearing, oh, someone else did something wrong. I don't know what it is about people, us, me, you, that resonates with like wanting to know how things are bad. But in the context of college admissions, people want to celebrate how you are growing.
Yeah.
And even in an essay like the one you described, I am so sorry for that student's loss, and that must have been so challenging for him. And as the reader, who's removed from the immediate pain of that loss, I'm still reading to celebrate how this young person is thriving and learning.
That's right.
And
That's
and
right.
so I need to understand the backstory, the context of what has been the challenge, so that I can appreciate who he is becoming.
I think you're exactly right on that. Are there essay prompts here that pose sort of similar potential traps, pitfalls, ways that I think students could fall into an expectation that they need to respond to something, or that they need to respond to something in a particular kind of way?
To me, that's prompts 1 and 7. One
Okay,
is
one for sure.
describe
Yes.
an example of your leadership experience.
Yeah.
And 7 is what have you done to make your school or community a better place?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also the buzzwords of leadership and community service feel so ingrained to the American college admissions process. Kids think they're supposed to, and that it's supposed to look a certain way.
Right.
And so I think I actually have read some of my least compelling essays in those 2 responses, because a student probably should have been thinking about it in a different way or writing about something else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, one of the things that I come back to when I talk to students, especially about prompt number 1, but also with number 7, if the mission of the essay you've written is to get something across that already exists in your activities list. So you're writing an essay because you were the president of a club. Well, you know what? That's already on your activities list. They're going to know about that. So is there some story that you need to tell about your particular brand of leadership? Or are you just writing this essay to underscore the fact that you're the president? I think you want to trust that they're going to have that information, and only write the leadership essay if you have more to share that goes in great detail beyond the title that you had. Same is true of community service. You don't need to write this essay to tell me you did community service if it's elsewhere in your application. And the UCs have a robust extracurricular activity section where you can write a lot actually about each of your service activities. So make sure that you're going in greater detail with these essays in order to wield, especially numbers 1 and 7. Focusing on specific prompts, what about number 8? 8 is what, above everything else, I don't know the exact phrasing, above everything else, what makes you a strong candidate for admission to the UC?
I think this might be another one where we might have a difference of opinion.
I hope so. It's more interesting for our listeners if we differ. Yeah.
To me, this is topic of your choice.
Yes.
Right? The UC doesn't know what to ask in order to allow every individual young person to be able to show their most compelling traits. And so this is, hey, what do we not know to ask? Just tell us that thing. Mm-hmm. I don't feel overwhelmed by the language of what makes you stand out as a strong candidate. To me, that's just because they had to figure out words to ask, tell us something. Mm-hmm. So I don't think students need to feel pressure to be unique or to be best or to be strong. So like, just tell us what I need to know that I haven't already heard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I joked with a couple of powerlifters that this would be a great spot for them to talk about their powerlifting experience because of the word strong. But they both rejected that proposal, and rightly so. I was just kidding. So I want to hear a little bit about your approach for actually selecting topics for students and how you recommend that they go about this. And actually, when I do it, I have students go through only prompts 1 through 7. I have them kind of ignore number 8. I think that that's something that I'll have them propose an idea for it if nothing else really fits that we've identified as an important part of their experience. But I really have them look at prompts 1 through 7. How do you sort of alluded to this, I think, in the initial conversation about how students look at the different prompts, but how do you actually engage with this question of choosing the right prompts for a particular student?
So I do pretty much the same thing, but I include number 8 because I think so often people have an idea in their head they've been thinking about it, and maybe one of their friends said it's like, I want to hear that. I don't want to dance around it for 3 drafts until we figure out you did actually want to talk about this thing. So I include number 8, and I have all my students, even if they're not applying to the UCs at all, I give them these 8 prompts and I say, come up with 8 ideas. It doesn't have to be 1 per essay. It could be 2 different ideas about leadership, 2 different ideas, but I want to hear 8 possible things that you could talk about, given the long list of questions and sub-questions that are here. And I encourage them in their brainstorming to identify a message. What is the purpose of my telling this story? A so what? And a vehicle, which is what anecdotes, experiences, data am I going to share so that I convey the message? And the drama of junior year on the soccer team is the vehicle to deliver the personal growth of whatever happened because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people that essays are about two things. So you've got the surface level topic, which is what you tell your aunt and uncle you're writing your essay about. And then you've got the deeper topic, which is the takeaway that the admission officer is going to grab from reading it. I have students write 2 ideas for each of the first 7 prompts. And what we do is we sort of rank the top 4 from among that group. And so you might find, for example, that your 2 best essays are both for the creative prompt, but you can only write one of them. So you're actually going to pick the 3rd best topic because it fits another prompt in some cases. So there's a little bit of strategy that's done there. In terms of that strategy, I heard from one of our colleagues around students who are interested in STEM, particularly engineering or CS, that there is a specific prompt that they should respond to and that they should address their interest in that field. Do you share that, and which prompt do you think might be the best way to convey an interest in STEM?
I do encourage students who are applying to engineering to make sure that somewhere in their suite of 4 essays, they address head-on content related to their STEM pursuits. So the surface topic you talk about with your aunt and uncle, the vehicle. But I also am reading for the subcontext that shows a thinker who approaches the world from an engineering perspective. And so the creative prompt might be the one that delivers an engineering mindset, someone who is approaching a problem from a million different angles and is excited about everything that doesn't work because it gives them an opportunity to try it again in a new way.
Yeah.
That's great. It doesn't have to take place in robotics club.
Right.
But I do think that's an important thing for engineering applicants, is to make sure that that suite of 4 essays somewhere strongly conveys their readiness for the intellectual and process-oriented pursuit of engineering study.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I've actually seen more of my engineering students have gone with that creative prompt as a way of talking about their pursuits. I think a lot of students gravitate toward number 6, which is to talk about an academic subject that inspires you and how you've addressed it inside and outside the classroom. And I'll just say that one of the major pitfalls there is that it can start to feel like a list. I'm listing all of the things that I've done in this space, and that can sometimes hold you back.
Well, I wonder whether, you and I both have a particularly narrow regional perspective on this. Silicon Valley is the heart of computer science innovation, or has been for a long time. And I have read a lot of essays in response to prompt number 6, where a young person had access to great computer science coursework early in their high school career that then extended into computer science pursuits. And that's a hard way to differentiate your intellectual readiness and your enriching experiences. So I think I wouldn't lean on number 6, the academic subject, as a crutch, as the only way to convey that I have studied this thing already.
Cool. I think that's great, Becky. We're out of time. We didn't touch apologies to number 2, number 4. I think that's the only ones we didn't touch. They're great. They're all great topics. We love these suite of essays. I always have my students start with them. I know you do too, Becky. They're fantastic. And I want to thank you for coming. You're fantastic. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. When we come back from the break, we are going to talk to Julia Jones about early decision and early action. So don't go away.